Alrighty then. I suggest that we kick this off. So good afternoon to all of the participants. Welcome to a relevant, important event for Ukraine, sustainable development, new opportunities for business developments. We'll be talking about how Ukrainian small and medium enterprises can access sustainable public procurement and broaden their markets. The event is organized by the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center, as well as the UN Environment Program. As part of the overall program, enhancing sustainable public procurement for the regional transition to inclusive green economy in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia, which is supported by the United Nations Development Account. My name is Katerina Romanova. I represent the Recipe Center in Ukraine, and I will be hosting and moderating today's event. Now, let's move on to the official opening ceremony, and I would like to invite Anna Yuldashova to take the floor, Deputy Director of the Public Procurement Department, Head of the Public Procurement Policy Division at the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine. Anna, please go ahead. The floor is yours. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. It is my pleasure to welcome you all at today's event. The topic is going to be incredibly interesting, and I hope that everyone will find it useful and we will enjoy a fruitful discussion. What can I say about procurement? Those of us who are here today are probably well aware that procurement is a difficult process. It is a process that is difficult to join. You need multiple documents. You need to go through multiple stages before you are awarded a contract and before you are able to sign an agreement. So I want to stress and I want to turn your attention, specifically the business representatives, that since the 19th of April last year, the new edition of the law on public procurement is in place, and it allows the organizers of trends to introduce non-price criteria, evaluation criteria. So if some of you might not have come across this reality, I want to draw your attention to this because we'll be talking about sustainable procurement today, also about environmentally friendly procurements, and thus the organizers may be able to use sustainability, eco-friendliness as additional criteria, selection criteria and assessment criteria under their procurement procedures. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to our partners. The Ministry of Economy has been covering these issues for a while now and trying to introduce information materials into the public sphere, but still international experience is something that we always cherish and that is always useful. So in collaboration with UNEP, that is supporting the EU for Environment program, and also I would like to say thank you to the World Bank. With their support, we've been able to develop a good deal of important information materials to organize a number of events that were focused on green procurement and sustainable public procurement, which enables the organizers, the procuring parties, to get a better understanding of the issue and to apply these ideas properly in their tender procedures. I would like to call on the participants to be attentive, to pay attention to the requirements formulated in the relevant documents, to be aware of what they need to comply with and what documents they need to provide in order to certify the sustainability of their offers. And please not forget that if you come across any discrimination, any biased approaches, please use the relevant functionality of the Prozoro platform. Ask for elaborations, provision of information, and don't forget that you can also appeal against discriminatory practices through the Antitrust Committee of Ukraine. But in view of the fact that the amount of information on public procurement is now quite significant, we hope that we've taken these significant first steps towards making sure that procuring parties are more considerate in the way they formulate their procurement requirements. We understand it's difficult to be pioneers. It's difficult to be the first ones to apply something new. It's always better to follow in someone's wake, a trailblazer, so to speak. So we are currently at the stage where some of the first steps are being made, and so we are able to avoid repeating some of the first mistakes. I hope that since lots of useful materials on implementing non-cost requirements, lots of videos have been generated, lots of training materials are available for organizers to apply these criteria properly and to allow businesses to participate in tendering procedures and to arrive at a clear understanding of what is being asked of them under specific procurement procedures. And also, this should enable businesses to understand what their competitive advantages are. This story is not about discriminating businesses. It is about enabling businesses that possess a sustainable competitive advantage to succeed. So this is more about the way participants are selected, and this is more about businesses being able to positively realize their potential and end up with a successful agreement. So I honestly hope that this topic will be developed further. The Ministry of Economy is an active supporter, and I hope that Ukrainian businesses will have wider opportunities for implementing these sustainable tools when participating in tender procedures. I want to wish you all a fruitful discussion, an interesting training event, and further successes in practice. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Anna. Now it is my pleasure to invite the program officer at the Economy Division of the UNEP, a person very much experienced in sustainable public procurement with more than 10 years of experience managing the United Nations Environment Program in this direction. Please welcome Farid Yaker. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Katerina, for the kind words and the great moderation. Dear Ms. Anna Yuldashova, Deputy Director of the Public Procurement Department, Head of the Public Procurement Policy Division of the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine, dear participants, I would like also to thank the Resource Efficiency Cleaner Production Center for the great collaboration on the organization of this series of webinars. This is the third webinar we're organizing with you in the region, a webinar dedicated to the business opportunities related to SPP. Ukraine, for us, is an important country. It's a regional frontrunner on SPP implementation under the leadership of the Ministry of Economy and the active involvement of a number of actors from civil society, among them the Living Planet NGO, which is following also the Ukraine Ecolabel. Ukraine is, we believe, joining the international movement towards SPP implementation, which is connected to Sustainable Development Goal 12.7. You should know that there is a specific target among the Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to promote public procurement practices that are sustainable in accordance with national policies and priorities. We have been supporting Ukraine since 2013. We appreciate the dedication and commitment of the government of Ukraine towards SPP implementation, and we are sure that your country will soon join the group of countries compliant with this target of the Sustainable Development Goals. So far, we have, in the last data collection exercise, we have counted 33 countries in the world, representing 69% of global GDP, and we are sure that this list will be extended in the next data collection exercise. The countries that are taking part, as I said, global GDP, and they are committed to greening their public procurement, and all the countries represent in average 12%. The public procurement in average represents 12% of GDP, and it's really therefore a critical tool, a critical lever to make a contribution to solving the three major crises that humanity is facing on climate, nature, and pollution. Total public procurement represents $13 trillion US. If we turn a little portion of this size of this GDP, like 5%, 10%, 15% of those huge amounts into green transformative impacts on the markets. We can make sure that there are more companies, businesses that turn green because they will have a demand at their disposal. There will be a big demand signal that will shift and will drive then the market towards sustainability. Taking advantage of the huge potential of public procurement means, however, that we need to engage a thorough dialogue with the productive sector. This is what we are doing today, and we have to build their capacities also. We have also to signal to the market well in advance the SPP orientations to allow it to adjust its production processes. And it means also aligning the industrial, fiscal, and sustainability policies to synergize the impact. SPP, sustainable public procurement, cannot work in isolation. It has to be coupled, combined with other. It means also raising the awareness of the stakeholders on the challenges faced by Ukraine and the planet, and on the international commitments of your country, for example, on climate or on the sustainable development goals. I'm sure that this workshop will help you better understand and define the modalities of involvement of your companies and of the private sector in your future SPP policies. Be assured that we remain on your side to help you progress on the path to sustainable public procurement.
Thank you very much. And now for our speakers to be able to get a closer idea of who is joining us today, and for them to be able to properly stress the right topics in their presentations, we have prepared a short poll for you. If you would please take the time to answer the questions that you have on your screens right now, please take 5 minutes to answer these 3 questions. All right, then I think that everyone who is willing to provide their answers have already done so. And let's have a look at the results. Here they are on your screen. Right, I can see them. So based on your replies, I can see that the audience is very knowledgeable, very interested in issues such as the circular economy, sustainable public procurement, resource efficient and cleaner production. Even a few people are aware of chemical leasing. Then when it comes to what sustainable means, and when it comes to the first steps towards preparing for sustainable public procurement, I can see that a few elaborations, I guess, will be in order. So, and hopefully we will be helped out by the expert of the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center, Johannes Fresner. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon from my side. I'm Johannes Fresner. I'm a technical expert for the Resource Efficiency and Cleaner Production Center in Kiev. Our topic now is actually sustainable public procurement as a modern approach towards green economy. And I would like to focus specifically on what is in for us as small and medium-sized enterprises. Public authorities are major consumers. If they choose environmentally friendly products by applying sustainable criteria, this would mean a major move towards a green economy. And sustainable public procurement is now the process in which public authorities apply sustainability criteria when they take their purchasing decisions. Farid has already mentioned, this is really a big market, probably the biggest single market globally. The market of public procurement is estimated at 13 trillion US dollars. In the European community, the market is 2 trillion. So these markets are significant. The data for Ukraine, you will know much better than I do. UNEP asked in 2019, globally governments, and 56 governments responded to this survey, whether they have policies, whether they have strategies, whether they have implemented sustainable public procurement. And in this slide, we see the results. More than 90% of governments see SPP as a policy component, and actually almost 80% have already included it in one way or the other in regulation. If we look at the right-hand side of the slide, we see what goods governments are applying sustainable purchasing criteria for. The list is topped by IT equipment, but we also have here office equipment, vehicles, cleaning, construction services. So basically all sorts of products. And the Ukraine is very active also in this respect. We will hear in a minute of our keynote speaker, Ms. Halyna Buzan, about which product groups Ukraine is considering, which product groups do have sustainable criteria for purchasing already in the Ukraine. What are these criteria? And I was glad to study the results of the poll because you are very well familiar with the criteria we are talking about. Most of these criteria applied in sustainable public procurement relate to resource efficiency, to the mitigation of hazardous materials, to energy efficiency. So these criteria did not were no surprise for us. Sustainable public procurement will even become more important. More than 2/3 of governments and governmental organizations in the survey I was addressing agreed that in the future SPP will become more and more relevant. Now, what does this mean in a nutshell? What we are talking about is basically that we are witnessing a change in the economic model which we are using. We are moving away from the classical linear model, which consists of extracting materials from this planet, transforming them in production into a product, distributing, using the product, and at the end of the useful life, landfilling these. These pictures are showing these three major steps: the extraction, the production, distribution, use, and then the landfilling. This linear model is obsolete. Farid has mentioned the international agreements. The model we want to follow, and the model which is guiding us as a vision, is the model of a circular economy, in which we close all the material cycles by reducing the use of hazardous materials to facilitate recycling, by increasing, maximizing, I'm tempted to say, the efficiency of production, minimizing waste at the same time, energy efficiency by using renewable energy, and by supporting recycling in whatever dimension. This includes supporting activities and changes in the business models we are using, fostering sharing, renting, repairing, refurbishing, so to have a longer useful life of the products we are using. This model, the application of this model, gives a huge opportunity, and this will materialize in the form of more and more uptake of eco-labeled products. I'm showing some examples here, which is the sustainable public purchasing in Berlin, in Vienna, and the platform which you're using in the Ukraine. Just for your information, the city of Vienna, which is capital of Austria with about 2 million population, exclusively uses sustainable public purchasing. So they apply sustainability criteria to everything they buy. Life cycle analysis, knowledge of life cycle costs becomes an integrated element of many tenders. So applying all these would support our policy on climate change. And at the same time, we could explore this in the discussion if you're interested, has a huge potential of improving financial efficiency of the participating businesses and reduces cost on the long term by considering life cycle cost for the procurers. In summary, this slide shows us what to keep an eye on. This is basically eco-labels, and this will depend, of course, on the market which you are addressing, whether you're looking more into Ukrainian eco-labels or if you want to export in maybe into European eco-labels, and to have a certified environmental management system. This is why we have the logo of ISO 14000 in this slide. Now, to come to conclusions, what would be my personal, also from my personal experience, my recommendation to all of you: start early, because preparing for these SPP criteria will take some time. If we talk about life cycle assessment, this requires data, this requires preparation, maybe also with your suppliers. Talking about eco-labeling, we are talking about reducing hazardous materials, reducing packaging, maybe increasing energy efficiency, increasing resource efficiency. We will hear much more about this from the Resource Efficiency and Cleaner Production Center. And if we are preparing for an environmental management system, we need a policy, a team, we need an assessment by environmental impact, procedures, and auditing. So just as a summary, let's start preparing, because there are a few small steps to take, and this will take some time. That's all from my side as an introduction, and I'm looking forward to learn together with you more from our keynote speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. I am pretty sure that the poll we ran at the beginning would have had different answers if we had run it now. I want to remind all of the participants not to be shy, and feel free to drop your questions into the chat, and we'll be able to answer them at the end of the event. So now that we have a clear idea as to what SPPs are, we need to understand how prepared Ukraine in general and its industrial sector in particular is to the introduction of SPP. So we will now listen to the presentation by Halyna Buzan, the Executive Secretary of the National Technical Committee for Standardization, TC82 Environmental Protection, at the State Ecological Academy of Postgraduate Education and Management of the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine. So Halyna, please go ahead. Yes, greetings everyone. So I work at a team that is focused on implementing SPPs in Ukraine since 2016. And it was in front of my eyes that all of the transformations have been going down. I can share the story of how it was happening with you very briefly. The whole story started, the story with implementing SPPs started in 2014 in Ukraine, as soon as the EAP Green project was implemented here, the predecessor of EU for Environment. It was the support of this project that a good deal of achievements, a good deal of change were achieved. We ran an assessment of market preparation and we started preparing organizers, procuring agents for implementing this completely new approach. Understandably, the organizers are always wary of changes. They are always afraid of checks, audits, appeals. So it was quite difficult to develop their capacity and to explain to them how important and how relevant the sustainable public procurement approach was. But we know that persistence leads to great achievements, and we had lots of explanatory events, and thus we arrived at running the first pilot tenders where sustainable criteria were included. These were under threshold, so-called below threshold procurements for various paints and lacquer materials. These were some of the first tendering procedures. Then we had lots of other procurements that were run for the same categories of goods, and also for heat insulation materials, as well as for heat modernization services. So these were the first three categories where we had a sustainable evaluation criteria developed, which could be included into the technical specifications, both under the selection criteria as well as the evaluation criteria. And several times the law of Ukraine on public procurement was amended, which is the legal foundation for implementing the sustainable public procurement approach. Currently, Article 23 stipulates this approach by saying that procuring agencies can formulate environmental requirements, environmental characteristics for the procured items, which can be included both in the technical specifications and in the non-cost criteria. And thus the consideration and evaluation of the tender proposals relies both on costs and on the life cycle cost assessment. The life cycle cost assessment is one of the important elements under the general SPP approach. And one of the first success stories, I guess, would be the example of what happened in 2019. The Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine issued its order on using industrial waste in road construction. The use of slag is a significant issue for Ukraine. As we know, the area covered by slag waste is huge. It amounts to 4%, approximately 4% of the entire territory of Ukraine. That's the area covered by ash and slag. And in order to resolve this issue, this order was applied, which now obligates tender organizers to include non-cost criteria amounting up to 30% when reconstructing and repairing objects of transport infrastructure, including roads. And if this approach is applied, a much greater preference falls on the business that meets the requirement for the fraction of slag in the road cover. And here I have included the calculations for the non-cost materials. This is non-cost components. This is an automated formula. And if the non-cost criteria amount for 11%, then two offers costing 100,000 hryvnias and 80,000 hryvnias will essentially be equal. So the business meeting the non-cost requirements, but providing a much higher cost, a 20,000 hryvnias higher cost, will still be able to win under the tender. And thus they will be able to cover their expenses in terms of moving the slag. We are currently considering various aspects such as slag transportation, slag preparation, the technological preparation of the slag so that it can be used as part of the road construction, their analysis in line with standardized methods, and etc. And here's an example of an object that has been constructed in the Dnipropetrovsk region. This is the Reshetelivka-Kobelyaki road, a huge scale project, which has used a 30% fraction of slag in the road cover. This is a huge amount, and this was a huge site. So this goes to show that the approach is effective. Road construction was one of the new product categories for which we developed sustainable procurement criteria. After 2016, we analyzed and for 12 categories, apart from the ones we had covered before, such as washing solutions, heat insulation materials, and paints and lacquers. We also came up with a whole list of goods as well as works and services that now have criteria developed. If we're talking about goods, we're talking about polymeric material goods, furniture, wooden goods, floor covers, textile materials. There's a whole list of criteria that has been developed for construction materials and goods such as ceramic goods, concretes, dry construction mixtures, plastic doors and windows, window units. If we're talking about services, then we have sustainability criteria developed for a road construction, the construction and reconstruction and refurbishment of sites, as well as catering services. So sustainable criteria have been developed. They can be used as non-cost criteria, but they may also be included in the technical specifications per se, if they are properly justified. When we're talking about the construction of roads, this is probably the area where we have moved forward the most, apart from the Cabinet of Ministers order, which recommended that non-cost criteria be used. Our technical committee, TC82, Environmental Protection, has also implemented criteria to evaluate the environmental impact assessment of sites which fall under the requirements of an EIA, and the criteria that are formulated in these standards have been in place since 2020. They are part of the national standardization system, and these documents formulate sustainability criteria, which can also be implemented in public procurement. Apart from this, I would like to turn your attention to the fact that all the criteria developed in Ukraine, both for road construction and refurbishment, as well as for all of the other types of goods, they are all harmonized and they all take into account the requirements of European approaches, the European green public procurement criteria. We always consider them. We always take them into account, and as much as we could, we adapted them so that they are usable in Ukraine, so that they comply with Ukrainian legislation, and so they meet the realities of the Ukrainian market. So here we are completely following the footsteps of our European colleagues. And when it comes to implementing the resource efficiency criterion, I will continue talking about this example of road construction. These approaches and these criteria are formulated, and they can be stipulated not only for road construction or reconstruction, but for any essentially kind of construction services, or to the procurement of goods, including construction goods, as well as other kinds of goods and materials. But I would like to turn your attention to the fact that all tender organizers have to justify any requirements that they formulate. That is what our legislation stipulates. So resource efficiency is defined in terms of the international standard ISO 14021, the principles and methods of self-declaration. The manufacturers can apply labels to their products in line with properly stipulated requirements under the ISO 21 standard. This standard is harmonized It is part of the Ukrainian standardization system, so you can refer to it. It has been translated into Ukrainian as well, and so if you're the tender organizer and you request that your tender participants provide justification of their resource efficiency and that a certain part, the content of reused material should comply with a certain level. They need to be able to provide justification and to prove that the calculations were run in line with the scheme that you have presented on the screen right now. So this justification can be provided in person by the manufacturers without them involving a third-party assessor, evaluator, without having a certification agent or a lab running the tests. If you are a tender organizer and you require any other types of eco-labels, for example, Johannes was talking about eco-labels. This is a common practice, and it has also become quite common in Ukraine as well. Many tender procedures have been run with this requirement. Here, you need to bear in mind that you, as the participant, as the manufacturer or provider, need to show that your eco-label has been issued by a third party and that you are in a possession of a certificate, thus proving that your products are in compliance with all the requirements. Also, please focus on point 5 of Article 23, which says that all certificates, test results that the participant provides as part of their tender proposal, they need to also be accompanied by a document certifying the accreditation of the issuing agency. So you need to provide both the certificate itself, saying that your product has an eco-label on it, and also provide the accreditation papers of the relevant authority that issued your certificate. That's the practice that we have in place right now. That's the requirements that we have in place, but we see quite often that tender organizers forget to formulate this requirement in their documentation. But in fact, well, and then they receive and take in unjustified certificates. This happens just due to the fact that they are still not trained enough, still not familiar enough with the relevant documents. We are working hard on improving on developing their capacity, but unfortunately mistakes still occur, and these organizers will be bearing responsibility when they are checked. So you need to be aware of this and be well versed, provide both the certificate itself and the accreditation papers. The law mentions that you need to receive your documents from relevant authorities that are properly certified and have received either accreditation or have had their competence proven through a different procedure. We've got in touch with the Ministry of Justice, and they've explained to us that the only justifying document is an accreditation certificate from the relevant authority. And you can actually use the website of the National Accreditation Agency of Ukraine to check whether the agency you worked with has been accredited properly. So if you're planning to participate in a sustainable procurement procedure, if you see that non-cost criteria or technical criteria refer to the sustainability of your products, you need to make sure that the certificate you hold will be justifiable, will be supported, and that the agency certifying you needs to be accredited at the National Agency for Accreditation. Start by checking which agents have been accredited by the authority. I also want to turn your attention to a different standard that is currently at the approval stage and will be implemented quite soon. This is the adaptation of ISO 15686, section 5, which is focused on construction sites and on their life cycle impact evaluation. So we're talking about the methodology of running the life cycle evaluation for construction sites. This standard will probably be useful for you to be able to demonstrate and to be able to calculate the rationale behind specifically your construction site. So if you're able to show that the life cycle impacts are lower than what your competitors are offering, thus you will be more successful in the selection process. I would also like to turn your attention to a peculiar procuring agent in Ukraine who has been quite useful in implementing sustainable procurement criteria and energy savings criteria. This is Ukrzaliznytsia, Ukrainian Railways, a company that spends around 30 billion hryvnias annually, and a good deal of products are procured by them with the use of sustainable procurement criteria. They have requirements in terms of the recycled, the segment of recycled produce, requirements in terms of energy efficiency, resource efficiency. So you can look at their tender procedures as positive examples. Another example is the procurement of construction for the procurement of construction services and insulation services for a kindergarten, number 99 in Kiev, which was also run using sustainable procurement criteria. And as you can see, the outcomes that they were able to achieve through implementing this approach, they're reflected on the screen here. And I have a few other examples of procurement for such kinds of materials as polymeric material goods. Many, pipes are often procured, for example, under this criteria, and they are often procured with the use of sustainable procurement criteria. Quite often, two types of criteria are used. So the eco-labeling requirement is introduced in line with this through ISO 14024, when the provider needs to hold a certificate of an eco-label, and also some of the requirements are only implemented partially for polymeric goods. For example, the procuring party might only choose to use resource efficiency requirements in line with ISO 14024, where the goods are supposed to have a certain % of recycled content. If we're talking about environmentally friendly construction materials in Ukraine that have been able to prove their compliance with ISO 14024 and have received eco labels and eco certificates, the market in Ukraine is quite saturated, and it can meet the needs of both public procurement and private procurement, to be honest, as well. About 20% of all materials and goods in the building market possess eco labels. A few of the labels are represented here, which are most common in Ukraine that you can come across. This is imported. These are imported materials with the Flower Angel label, the Nordic Swan, the EU Eco label, and then the Ukrainian environmental certificate is represented, the green stork. If any of our participants could drop a message into the chat to let me know if they've come across these labels on the items they used, or perhaps we also have manufacturers represented here who also have received relevant certificates. I would be very interested to learn of this. Now, a few more examples with a reference to specific tender procedures that you can study and that you can try and emulate very well. The criteria have been formulated specifically in the technical specifications. So they are not non-cost criteria, but rather selection criteria. And here's another example from the city of Bucha in the Kyiv Oblast. They've run a construction of a school which was built completely throughout with the implementation of sustainable procurement and construction approaches. The school has since successfully passed environmental certification after it was constructed, after it has been able to demonstrate positive outcomes through the efficient implementation of public procurement. This school devotes a great deal of attention to its environmental policy. This school, first of all, has an environmental protection strategy, which is not particularly common in Ukraine yet. So there's another successful case that I wanted to draw your attention to. I would also like to invite you to visit our YouTube channel, the YouTube channel of the team that includes TC82, the NGO Living Planet, as well as other experts who are working on implementing sustainable public procurement in Ukraine. If you visit our YouTube channel, you will be able to have a look at a number of webinars, seminars, conference recordings that cover from different perspectives and for different audiences the current state of implementing SPPs in Ukraine. We consider various criteria for specific types of products and goods. So I kindly invite you to join, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will be always aware of the latest news, and you will always know of our training and information events. You'll also be able to join them completely free of charge. These events are run under the EU for Environment program, as well as the program on promoting energy efficiency in Ukraine, which is implemented by GIZ. We also implement a whole range of our own initiatives and actions, and we run capacity building events, delivering environmental knowledge for everyone. That's the name. We run a whole cycle of events in September and October of 2021, and you can find the recordings on our page, as well as some other events that are trying to promote environmental living. We hold training events for teachers, for children, and lots of other activities. So speaking about what we're doing right now and what needs to be done in the future, we need to implement electronic fields for information in the Prozoro system. Unfortunately, currently we cannot use the monitoring system to analyze how sustainability criteria are being applied, the number of criteria applied, and the modes of their application. This will only become possible when documents will be uploaded not as scanned PDFs, but when electronic fields in the electronic tender documents will be filled in. So the documents will be generated automatically after data is put in. And these characteristics of criteria will be included, such as efficiency, quality, safety, environmental protection measures, and innovative nature. This is the selection that formulates the basis of sustainability requirements for any sort of procurement. So this is the work that we need to implement. Us, the Ministry of Economy, and the Prozoro State Enterprise, and we're joining efforts to achieve this goal. And finishing up, I want to say that I honestly hope, I sincerely hope that us as a country that is aligning itself with Europe, we have the ambition of becoming a full-fledged European country, and we know that European states have requirements in terms of sustainable procurement for a whole range of products, which necessarily must be procured with the use of sustainable procurement. And I hope that Ukraine will soon achieve and arrive at this state as well, especially in view of the fact that we've already developed a good deal of requirements, and the number of products in the market are already being procured with the use of sustainable procurement criteria. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be always happy to answer. If you wish to continue the discussion beyond this event, here's my email and you can get in touch with me. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Halyna. And I see that we have several questions in the chat. So would you mind answering them right now? For example, there is a question from Mr. Alexander Chubenko, who says, that you have mentioned impact calculation on your slide. So could you just briefly touch on what this is? Yeah, so last year our team developed a calculator, so to speak, for implementing non-cost criteria in road construction. And we've developed a tool now, a calculator that allows you to compile a set of criteria, requirements for road construction, and then run the calculation. So it allows you to calculate the impact of non-cost criteria in road construction. The tool is publicly available. I can share the link with you. I will just need to take a few minutes to find it. I will share the link in the chat and you'll be able to follow it to the website. All right, thank you very much, Halyna. Here's another question. I hope you will stay with us until the end of the event, because I feel you will not be able to answer the question with a single sentence. So we'll have one more delayed question for you at the end of the event. We can see that you've been able to spur interest from our participants. All right, if you wish, you can go ahead and answer the question now. Is there a methodology for selecting sustainability criteria and marking criteria for participation in public procurement? What document does this stipulate? Well, currently, there is no legislatively defined set of criteria, and the Ministry of Economy is not planning to actually put one in place. But there are methodologies and there are criteria formulated, published at the Infobox Prozoro page, which can be used, but they are not mandatory. So these are just explanations, elaborations. The ultimate decision is the discretion of the tender organizer. There you will have explanations for each of the specific criteria, and it will mention which regulatory documents, statutory documents are there to justify should you select to implement a certain requirement. But there is no general mandatory document. We're working on this. Right, thank you very much, Halyna. You can also feel free to respond to the questions in writing in the chat, and we will try to stick to the schedule. And I hope that our participants have not lost their energies, because we have another poll in store for you. We want to find out how prepared small and medium enterprises are right now to engage in sustainable procurement and to implement resource efficiency. You are supposed to have 3 new questions on your screens right now, so please go ahead and provide your response. Right, so I see that one of the main benefits to implementing public procurement, you see that gaining access to the international market is one of the potential benefits. That's the answer given 75% by 75% of the participants. Right, then I can see that some of our participants have been able to take the first steps towards accessing sustainable public procurement. They have obtained eco-label certification, 5% of them, and they've implemented systems of energy and environmental management, which goes to show that the industrial sector in Ukraine has a very strong potential. Almost each and every one of you is interested in reducing waste generation, limiting environmental impact, you're interested in resource saving, and you want to improve the quality indicators of your products. So all of your answers prove that today's event is relevant, it is important and needed for the MSCs of Ukraine. And we also see, based on your replies, that only 5% of you know that eco-labeling is one of the key aspects on your path to implementing sustainable public procurements. And our next speaker, Mr. Ivan Omelchuk, the expert of the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center, knows a lot about eco-labels and is ready to share his knowledge with us right now. So please, Ivan, go ahead. Yes, greetings, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Katerina, for the introduction. I want to turn your attention that we also had people saying that they've already implemented eco-labeling, and I love that. I'm very pleased with that. It's great that we are having such a high-quality discussion, that we have businesses involved, experts and experts on certification involved. That's great, and that's the right thing to do. Now, from my side, I would like to talk about how SPPs and businesses interact. I will talk about why implementing them is useful. This will probably be more interesting to those businesses who are planning to participate in SPPs, who are exporting already or are planning to export their products, who are in partnerships with foreign brands, as well as for companies who are already implementing or planning to implement sustainability approaches in their business models. Right, so as you might have guessed, we will be talking not only about B2G. Sustainable procurement is also something characteristic of the B2B system. We can probably track the dynamics in both sectors, since more and more companies are now developing sustainability reports, especially international companies. And the fundamental idea behind their approach to sustainability is focusing more on each of the supply chain elements. And based on the experience of the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center, at least 3 companies, we are aware of at least 3 companies who are in partnership with international brands and have been forced to adapt their manufacturing with respect to sustainability criteria. They're implementing energy efficiency requirements. They are increasing their renewable energy content, improving their waste management approaches, etc. So if we're discussing the B2G system, we know that we have the Prozoro tool in place in Ukraine, and also Halyna talked about the constructor of non-cost criteria, and we see that the attention of manufacturing companies is quite high to this tool. So we have also chosen to cover these topics. We will also focus in more detail on what the life cycle of a product is and what's the difference between the life cycle and the calculation of the life cycle cost of the product. And we should probably focus on the third stakeholder in this conversation, the public, represented by the consumers. There have been lots of marketing research indicating that consumers currently devote more attention to sustainability, to environmental friendliness, and they also shift responsibility when it comes to sustainability from themselves onto the companies. And regardless of which sector you want to be engaged in, whether it is B2B or B2G, I want to suggest that we consider several factors in selecting sustainable providers, sustainable manufacturers, etc. So if you want to participate as a business, or if you want to organize a sustainable tendering procedure, this will be interesting for you. You need to be aware of operational costs, such as energy consumption, water consumption, etc. Indirect costs. So what contributes to indirect costs? If you are using old-fashioned equipment, old equipment, if your production processes include thermal processes, heat loss will be a factor which will impact the temperature inside your production premises, and thus your cooling and ventilation systems will be consuming more electricity, and you will be paying more for this electricity. That's an indirect cost. Talking about fair employment conditions and administrative costs, the situation is pretty clear. The better these conditions, the fewer checks, audits you will have, the fewer of your employees will address the relevant authorities. Talking about preliminary investment, this factor is interesting since we are now witnessing a huge change, for example, in the cost of energy resources, and returning to your equipment and to the implementation of energy efficiency options. The change in energy cost impacts the return of your investment. So the sooner you invest, the sooner you implement your measures, the sooner you will be able to return these investments and achieve profits. Now, the next group of factors are probably ones that need to be attributed to the sphere of circular procurement. This is another interesting trend, and I believe it will be actively implemented in our country as well. So these three segments are about using refurbished details, the possibility of secondary recycling, the cost of removal, and we've essentially talked about this before already. Also, another interesting factor contributing to competitiveness, to the competitiveness of providers, implementing minimal environmental or social standards is an opportunity. If the number of providers is limited, you have to think whether it makes sense to implement measures that would stimulate compliance. As Ms. Halyna mentioned, there are a number of criteria developed for public procurement. So there are three groups of them: the cost, the life cycle cost, or the cost along with other assessment criteria. And here we probably need to mention the concept of the life cycle. What you can see in this slide is the representation of a life cycle for furniture. So what does it take to manufacture a piece of furniture? So here we have broken down the manufacturing process and the consumption process into separate chunks. And the idea behind this approach is that the segmentation allows to assess the impact of your goods on the environment. According to the sustainability approach, each company impacts the environment. The impact can be positive or negative, and in order to be able to balance out, to even out these impacts, we need to collect precise data about each of the life cycle stages. For example, if we're talking about the raw materials used to manufacture our goods, we can formulate criteria, should it be wood, for it to be certified by the authority overseeing forestry. And then if you're implementing the resource efficient and cleaner production approach, that's also a solution. But we also need to take into account that each of these elements also needs to be seen through the triad, the sustainability triad: environmental, economic, and social factors. So if we consider the segment of logistics, how can we assess it? The larger the distance between the manufacturing point and the distribution points or the consumers, then the more fuel will be used, the higher will be the costs. If we look at the environmental aspect, the more fuel we consume, the more emissions we generate, thus the more impact we generate on the environment. If we're considering the social aspect, we need to take into account the logistics so that we reduce noise pollution, vibration pollution, and all of the other negative impacts on the people, both at the production site and along the transport routes. So we need to clearly differentiate between the life cycle assessment approach and the approach when we calculate cost throughout the life cycle. So we have recommendations that recommend that we segment, that we include the following criteria: procurement, use, servicing, end of life, and environmental protection. So how can this be done and how will it look in practice? So we have several proposals here, for example, in terms of lighting. We have halogen, fluorescent, or LED lamps suggested as solutions. Then they are segmented in terms of their immediate procurement cost, installation cost, electricity cost, replacement cost, etc. So if we used the price criterion exclusively, we would be interested in proposal A, in offer A. But if we run the life cycle assessment, we would include other components, and we would end up being interested in the LED lamps proposal, the C offer. Then if we run the assessment of different brands of LED lamps, how we can apply the life cycle cost assessment. We can consider several brands, and if we used cost exclusively, we would be interested in brand number 2. But when we account for the technical characteristics of the lamps, such as their consumption of energy, their luminosity, the period of time that they will serve, so then we end up seeing that the most interesting proposal is the one coming from brand number 3. So why implementing this approach is great? It's because, roughly speaking, we are able to run a more detailed analysis, and thus we will be able to arrive at a more objective decision. If we use the cost criterion exclusively, we will not be taking quality into account. Experience suggests that cheaper goods, sometimes more often than not, are of inferior quality. Right. Now, we also have an order on approving the methodology for determining the life cycle cost of goods. Why I'm mentioning this is because we already have a recommendation of applying life cycle cost analysis to a whole list of goods types. This is a recommendation, but if you're working with office equipment, medical equipment, IT, school furniture, or textiles, this is something that you should be aware of and that you should account for, to be aware of how the assessments are run and how the life cycle assessment is implemented. Now, then, talking about the constructor, so the Prozoro system includes a constructor, and this has been touched upon by Halyna. So it includes a non-cost criteria constructor. We can consider safety, quality, efficiency, environmental protection, etc. And I want to show you a matrix. For example, we're talking about procuring office paper. So we can see that under the efficiency criterion, we can have the indicator of recycled content. The normative document will be the technical conditions in line with the ISO, etc. The justification is that we care about forest protection and that the manufacturing of a single sheet of paper takes a certain amount of raw materials. Then the way the manufacturer can certify their compliance is through a certification in line in ISO 14021. And an example of an indicator is no less than 75% recycled content. And according to each criteria, you can also receive information in terms of the relevant gradation of each criterion. If we're talking about quality, for example, as a criteria, if you need paper, high quality paper for colored printing, you can justify that. You can justify class C paper, which is the cheapest one. Now, then, if we move on to safety, we can talk about chlorine, for example, because chlorine is an incredibly dangerous active chemical solution, chemical substance, and you can mention that your requirement is that fluor should not be used in the manufacturing process. Talking about environmental protection measures, then you need to have the indicator of sustainable woods management. Again, you can use the FSC or PEFC requirements, and in terms of the specific option, you can require the presence of an FSC certificate. Now, if we're talking about green criteria of the European Union, there is a great portal, a website where all of the materials are nicely segmented in terms of the various goods groups. For each of the types of goods, the criteria have been developed. There is a technical report and a description of the criteria themselves. So the criteria, there are criteria of the basic and advanced levels. And there's one more thing I wanted to show you. I wanted to mention that these criteria also include information on the existence of relevant eco labels. For example, what you have on your screens right now is IT equipment, electronics. The criteria, there is the criterion of energy efficiency, and here you have the various options of labeling. There's Energy Star, there's segmentation into energy efficiency classes, there's the eco label. Now, talking about eco-labeling. So eco-labeling is the application of a graphical mark as to certain environmental advantages of the products, and there are different kinds of labels. I just want to briefly touch on the peculiarities of each type. So environmental marking of the eco-labeling of the first type is voluntary, but it needs to be applied by an independent certification authority. This authority, as Halyna mentioned before, needs to be accredited properly. And what's probably most important about this type of eco-labels is that life cycle assessment is used to apply eco-labels of the first type. Also, these independent certification authorities have a network, the Global Eco-Labeling Network, which currently runs 27 different programs in no fewer than 60 countries of the world. And we're incredibly lucky. We also have the Green Stork program active in Ukraine. So our companies here in the country have the opportunity of participating in the program and receiving a certificate. This is a comprehensive process. As you can see, I've included a link here to the website of the eco-label. Here you can see the various stages that the process goes through. If you want to learn more, you can follow the link at the bottom of your screen. The presentation will be shared with all of you. Feel free to reach out to the program representative. So when we're talking about specific environmental advantages, these labels focus on specific parameters such as energy efficiency or the non-usage of dangerous textiles, the fact that it was produced properly, extracted properly, that it is going to be restored. Then we are talking about second type eco labels. Here, the eco aspect is indicated without an external check. So the company reports itself, declares that something is manufactured using recycled aluminum, or that the type of plastic used is not to be disposed of, etc. Then come eco declarations of the third type. They do not evaluate, they simply demonstrate the environmental indicators as to, for example, the specific energy consumption per unit of production or the equivalent of CO2 generated per item of product. This is done for the consumer to be able to see and compare these indicators themselves and arrive at a final decision as to what they consume. And then finally, there are social labels. These are compliance labels indicating the fact that your products meet the requirements of certain public movements or structures. For example, the Fair Trade label or the Rainforest Alliance label, which cares about the implementation of sustainable agriculture and forest use approaches. There's also, so there are these labels as well. And there's another thing I want to stress. Almost all of these labels have their catalogs. For example, if you visit the website of the Green Stork, you can see the segmentation per areas of activity, per types of goods. This is done for the companies who hold certificates to be able to demonstrate what they've undergone. And this is also a database of sustainable goods and sustainable manufacturers. And if you are developing procurement criteria, you can you can copy paste these criteria from there. Then finally, implementation strategies. So there's a self-declaration, expert assessment, or independent certification. So you can look at them as a hierarchical progression. You focus on a specific stage depending on what your approach is and what you see fit. On my behalf, I can probably take the opportunity to promote the Recipe Center. We always enjoy providing services to you. And obviously, we have an independent environment. The Green Stork organization provides eco-labeling of the first type based on life cycle assessment. So I hope I've been able to meet the time limits because there's also a very interesting speech from the Recipe Center. And it is with great pleasure that I will answer any questions you might have. If you do have them, feel free to get in touch or to drop your questions in the chat. Here are my contacts, so feel free to reach out and I'll be very happy to engage with you. Right, that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ivan. I see that there is a whole discussion going on in the chat, which we will address a little later. And now, as we have listened to the needs and the advantages from implementing SPPs, what should MSPs do as MSCs do as soon as they're ready? We will have Andrii Vorfolomeiev, the director of the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Center, speaking about this. Please go ahead, Andrii. The floor is yours. Right, thank you very much, Katarina. I will go ahead and share my presentation. It is my presentation that includes the questions and answers session, but since we have fallen a little beyond our time limits, we will try to address the questions in the chat. And if any remain, obviously, we will talk about them after the event. So in my brief presentation, I will try to deliver in less than 10 minutes, I will talk about the further steps. We have determined the issue, and we see that companies need to take lots of steps, the first of which is to understand what they have available and what they need to do next in order to make sure that their products meet the requirements of sustainable procurement. And we will provide this type of support free of charge under our project. So if we're talking about the project that brought us together here, which is enhancing sustainability to foster the transition to inclusive green economy in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus and Central Asia, which is supported by the UNDA. The center joined this project to engage with companies, to provide consultancy services to companies. I want to briefly mention that this project is composed of two main elements. We will be working with sustainable procurement, and there's a separate part of the contract, the iGo platform. This is a resource efficiency platform, where companies can run analyses of their current conditions and receive support with the next steps in their activities. But the iGo platform is a separate conversation. It is planned to be launched in February next year, so we'll be inviting you to a separate event on that. And we encourage you, of course, to engage with the platform because it will offer a number of opportunities. So returning to SPPs, I want to just mention a few words about our organization. Since we will be providing consultancy services to companies, we have been around and engaging with companies for a while now. Since 2013, we've had experience working with over 170 companies, probably more. Currently, the data was compiled 2 weeks ago, but the point is that we work with the topic of resource efficiency, making sure that the company is efficient in its usage of water, waste, water, raw materials, energy, etc. We run analyses, evaluations, compile balances, and suggest measures that companies can implement to improve their efficiency. And you can see some of the outcomes that we were able to achieve under one of our projects. So these are specifically the implemented measures, not the ones we suggested. The potential is always higher, but we will be talking not about resource efficiency, but about consulting services, consulting companies on sustainability and their compliance with sustainability requirements. So this service will be provided to companies in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. We will select 10 companies from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and 20 companies from Ukraine. And if we talk briefly about the service itself, here is what it consists of. These are the various stages. If I sum it up briefly, we will engage with the companies to fill in a questionnaire to check for their compliance with the ISO standard in sustainability. So the questionnaire has been drafted and we will go through filling it with the company to understand what their current position is, what practices are implemented and can be implemented. Then separately, this is what Ivan Omelchuk was talking about, certain goods have criteria and requirements applied to them, national and international, and then depending on the company's profile, we will consider their products and services in terms of their compliance with the criteria. And then finally, we will develop a report on the company's current condition and with recommendations as to what can be done. Since in order to participate in SPPs, as Mr. Johannes Fresner pointed out, you need to start in advance, you need to start early, because if you see the requirement that you need to have an eco label, you won't be able to obtain it within the time frame of the procurement procedure. So you need to prepare in advance. And obviously under this project, we will be able to draft free of charge an action plan for the companies, and our center will support businesses consult. So ultimately, as an output, the company will receive the report with recommendations, an action plan. If they're willing, we will be happy to come up with this, and we will also monitor its implementation. And finally, they will receive a certificate that can be placed very nicely on your wall or on your website. Briefly, speaking about the assessment, it should cover 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the company. Our experts are prepared to engage as soon as today, so please feel free to apply. The Recipe Center experts will be involved along with international experts, and due to all of the lockdown limitations, due to COVID conditions, everything will be done online. We can get in touch with you using any of the communication tools that you prefer. Of course, we are ready to sign an NDA should companies insist, but we will not be collecting any confidential data at this stage, but we're always ready to meet you halfway we will have no issues in terms of signing non-disclosure agreements. If you wish to get in touch, you can use the online form. The QR code is on your screen. Also, you can get in touch with our coordinator, Mr. Volodymyr Popovich, or perhaps you know someone from the Recipe Center personally or our regional coordinators. Feel free to get in touch. We will then contact you and we will start assessing the company following the algorithm that I've just outlined. So I was trying to be as brief as I could, but still cover the main points. I want to stress as well that we will keep supporting companies. So the report will not be the final point of our engagement. We are ready to support them with not only consultations, but also I want to turn your attention that the EU for Environment project, for example, will have a pilot project element. 5 to 7 companies will undergo life cycle cost assessment and impact assessment. So if you participate at this stage, if you mention that this assessment is something you need, you might be able to have it done free of charge, which will definitely support you in terms of further development. So please use the opportunities. Don't go by. If you happen to have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We will try to reach out to you with answers. I see there's a question regarding independent certification through the center. I am the director of the center. I can tell you we are not a certified agency to issue an eco label. Different agencies in Ukraine are occupied with that. There's the Green Stork and the various European labels that you can receive. But we can support you. We can point out as to what needs to be done. As you saw, some things can be done through self-declaration, so they're available to you. But before you're able to declare, you need to follow the relevant requirements. You need to be up to speed as to all of the requirements. Right, that will be it from me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrii. And we are moving on to the concluding section of the event. And to draw the conclusions, it is my pleasure to invite Lesya Nikolayeva, the international expert of the UNDA SPP project. Please go ahead. Yes, thank you very much, Katerina. Good afternoon to all of the colleagues. So on behalf of the project supported by the UNDA, I want to thank all of today's speakers for their incredibly interesting presentations and for very focused but still contentful messages for the businesses. The main goal of today's event was to communicate to you some of the most important bits of information for businesses. Under various projects, we run these webinars and seminars, and this is not the first time we are meeting, but today's event was meant to focus on businesses. And I hope that the businesses have been able to obtain interesting and useful information. I am incredibly grateful to the speakers for outlining this wide spectrum of issues, starting with the legal and legislative aspects, finishing with technical issues. They spoke about very specific technical criteria. I hope this has been useful for our companies, and this is exactly what our companies need to be able to consider participating in sustainable public procurement, non-cost with the use of non-cost criteria, and this will also probably incentivize the organizing authorities to include sustainable criteria in their documents. Legislation now allows for that and enables these solutions. I would say that the sphere of sustainable public procurement is quite specific and quite clearly outlined, but as we heard from the representative of the Ministry of Economy, the conditions and the requirements are pretty strict, which is why you need to be very attentive about what the tender documents say. And through the project, we try to support Ukraine in on its path towards developing proper documents, which will include all the necessary tips and suggestions for businesses. I also want to remind you of the broader impact, since Ukrainian companies and businesses is currently facing transformation challenges. We have very closely followed the negotiations in Glasgow, for example, on climate change, and we can all see the various challenges and requirements in manufacturing, in production, making sure that products are more environmentally friendly, greener, cleaner, that they impact the environment less, that they impact human health less. Ukraine developed and presented the second nationally determined contribution on limiting emissions, and companies will also need to follow these provisions. Ukraine is actively discussing the border amendment procedure for carbon emissions. So these are just a few examples of the challenges that Ukrainian companies are facing, and these challenges will definitely impact their activities and the transformation of their manufacturing processes. So I think it's important for businesses to hear some of the main messages, and we stand ready to prepare them in the transformation. The need for cleaner production is rising. The need for more environmental production is rising. And as Andrii mentioned, we will be very happy under this project to support companies in assessing their capacity, in evaluating their processes, and in providing them recommendations. I want to say thank you once more to all of the Ukrainian partners. I won't enumerate each of them because we have a few of them now. Thank you very much for your professionalism. I shared information on the regional workshop that we will be running on the 2nd of December. It's a regional European seminar. Please register. We will have very interesting speakers there as well. Information will be shared on countries of Central Asia, Eastern Europe, other regions in Europe. And I also want to say thank you to our interpreters. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much, Lesya, for your inspiring concluding speech and for the invitations. And we hope that we will be achieving new heights, fruitfully collaborating and achieving significant successes in implementing sustainable public procurement in Ukraine and beyond. See you around. Bye-bye.